Welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast. I'm Greg Burke, and now in my 24th year as Director of Athletics at Northwestern State University. Creating an environment in which student athletes and young professionals can develop skill sets to make them successful in any walk of life is invaluable. Mentors can provide an extra measure of confidence by helping them grow, by seeking their input, and by listening to their ideas. This and much more can be found in Will Baggett and Ty Brown's book, The Blueprint for a Successful Career, a foundation for developing young professionals. Find it on Amazon.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown, and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at OneQLeadership. Our guest today is Mark Alnutt. Mark is the Director of Athletics at University at Buffalo. Greetings, Mark. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Ty. Appreciate you having me on.
You're in year 2 there at Buffalo as the Director of Athletics. Of course, you spent time as Director of Athletics at Southeast Missouri State. Overall, in terms of college administration, it's been about 13 years. But prior to that, worked in football operations at Missouri before Mike Alden pulled you over into administration, which is somebody great to work for. That was in 2006. And of course, the time you spent down at Memphis with Tom Bowen. So you have a wealth of experience in college administration, experience in leadership, and experience working with the elephants of the profession. So I wanted to have you on to ask a couple questions about some of the things you deal with as an athletics director. First question I'll ask is, looking back at a year and a half in the chair there at University at Buffalo, what are some of the biggest aspects of being the AD there specifically that you've learned over this last, I guess, year and a half since you've been in the chair?
Well, first and foremost, you have to understand the culture of the place, and culture is obviously it can be said in a multifaceted way. From a department standpoint, from a campus standpoint, also community. In doing the research, for this position and understanding the leadership, the outstanding leadership, prior to me setting foot on campus. When you hear the names such as Ward Manuel, Danny White, Alan Green, and you saw the trajectory, so to speak, in terms of where this department was going. Understanding all that, you still have to dig in deep in terms of who's in the department with you, and what are the strengths that are there, what are obviously the weaknesses, and what do we need to improve on, and what are some opportunities there. So, the initial step that I did with my staff was to, do the SWOT analysis, and part of that assignment that I had them complete prior to me being on campus was, have a view of the department from their specific area. The strengths, the weaknesses, opportunities, and the threats, but also more importantly, I wanted to get to know the person. And part of the one-on-one meetings that I had, which I was fortunate to sit down with every one of our full-time staff members, which is over 120 people over a 3-month period, was the goal that I set for myself, was to, understand where they're coming from, and how they see the department, and obviously how they fit into the department, and ways that we can improve what we're doing, but also more importantly is trying to get to know the person. So as part of that SWOT analysis, separate of that SWOT analysis with that assignment was, I wanted to know them. Tell me about your family. Tell me about your alma mater. Do you have a nickname? Hobbies. What are your career aspirations and goals, and how can I help achieve something like that? So being able to sit down with those people, whether they came to my office or I went to their area to have what initially I planned to be a 30-minute conversation, which after several times of going over, I worked with my administrative assistant to make it an hour long, because it was very good discussion, and you learn so much from those conversations. You hear a lot of folks coming in saying, hey, this is the first time I've been in the AD office, or this is the first time that the AD has come to my office. You try to pinpoint and listen to some consistencies that you hear when dealing with the staff, and that helps you plan and what we feel would be obviously some short-term and long-term goals for us as a department, which proved beneficial.
Right. Yeah, it's important, right? So a lot of this first year, and I hear this a lot from my athletic directors, but it's really tuning into the people and tuning into relationships and partnerships across campus that can prove beneficial for all parties. I wonder, Mark, people who have been there 10 to 12 years, probably in the athletics department, have been through a number of different leaders. You mentioned Ward Manuel, Danny White, Alan Green, and now you're there in the chair. When you sit down with someone who's been there for a while and has been through a number of different leaders and all great leaders, tell me about that conversation, right? Because they've kind of grown accustomed to learning new leaders and learning how to communicate with someone new who will be making final decisions and probably have influence within the department. Tell me about conversations with those type of people.
Well, I can't initiate a conversation by saying trust me. I have to
Right, exactly.
I have to earn their trust, and how you earn that trust is, it's actions speak more than words. And for me, you're meeting with these folks, as you mentioned, that for them this is their fourth or fifth athletic director, and in their mind they're thinking, okay, well, you know what, Mark Alnutt, he's here. I guess I'll get to know him, but who knows, who
Yeah, right.
if he's going to be athletic director, 3-4 years down the road. So, I approach it as, we're all different in terms of, how we lead a department. So for me, I think the main aspect of that is, for them to see that, I want to empower, folks throughout our department to make our department better, that I do have that ear in terms of, suggestions, recommendations. They could be particular experts in their area. I'm gonna lean on them. But also at the end of the day, what those people want to see more than anything is progress, and how the department continues to evolve, how this department continues to bring great exposure to our university, and how they can be a part of that. Which, you'll have those conversations, as every AD might have, where this is how we always done it here, or this is that, or you're not going to get support from campus. And it just goes back to, that's when, my actions, obviously speaks volumes to them when they see how sincere I am about, my primary focus is continue to elevate this department, which, we have done and which we'll continue to do. And the main thing, and I believe this, from the extent of my heart, is you have to build a relationship. I mean, it can't just be transactional with your employees. There has to be a sincere interest in terms of the job that they do, but also in terms of what's outside of office hours, in terms of their family, as I mentioned before, their hobbies. Having a sincere interest in the person and not just the position, helps really build that buy-in. And when you have that buy-in that's built, and you have the opportunity to empower your folks to do great things, overall morale, of the department raises.
Right. The people you've worked for in terms of leadership, Mike Alden, Tom Bowen, these are elephants in the profession. And of course, you spent time as an AD at Southeast Missouri State. One thing that, from the outside looking in, that Tom Bowen and Mike Alden were and are very good at is evaluating leadership talent, right? Because people go off to become athletics directors. I wonder, is that something that when you work for somebody, you kind of glean some of the skills they have? I wonder if that's something that you took with you to Southeast Missouri State, now at Buffalo, in terms of identifying people who are leaders and slowly but surely putting them on the path to potential leadership positions.
No, for sure. I mean, again, it comes back to the mentors that you have and the names that you've mentioned, but it begins with Mike Alden, who I had the opportunity to work with, and you talk about a person who exemplified servant leadership, and he had the ability to, put us in situations that we might not have been comfortable with, but at the end of the day, we learned so much more from it. And he gave us, the opportunity for that professional development, and again, not just going to the NACDAs and the Lead Ones, the Cows of the world, but, having that opportunity when, a visiting AD, came to campus, or, we were on a road trip somewhere, to be able to open those doors and be able to begin those relationships with, whether it might be the visiting AD, or maybe, someone that's a peer of mine in terms of the role that I might have been in. So, to be able to build that network and be able to to develop you from a professional standpoint in terms of sharpening your skill set was very important. So that's something that I took with me when I was at Southeast Missouri State. I mean, the current AD there is a gentleman by the name of Brady Barkey, who was essentially my number two person when I was in the department there early on, and being able to see obviously he had that skill set and the opportunity to become that AD, which he is, and being able to identify that early on, or someone like Rachel Blunt, who is now the SWA at Central Michigan. She was our assistant AD for compliance at Southeast Missouri State, that has elevated herself to that leadership role at Central Michigan. And even when you go into Memphis, being able to work with folks or with coaches that be able to give them opportunity. So even here at Buffalo, we have some great people here, and I'm always the one that I want to make sure that regardless of how you cut a budget, that we also need to invest in people. And again, it's not just to invest in people for them to leave Buffalo. Ultimately, yes, if that occurs, that's great, but I also want to invest in people so when they leave Buffalo, they've also elevated us as a unit, us as a department, and they're able to put so much into Buffalo that now they're able to make that next step from a professional standpoint, and that makes me obviously overly happy as an AD when we see people advance and be able to attain their professional goals.
Right. So what I've learned, either from my experience or from experience talking to people through this podcast or through videos or just people that I've known, relationships I have, is that usually, throughout your career, you usually feel more comfortable doing certain things. And when you get to a leadership role, you kind of veer towards that. If something comes up, that's kind of your first thought, is the thing that I am most comfortable with. Is there a thing for you that you've done throughout your career? I know you came up in football operations and video operations, but moved into administration. Is there something you feel the most comfortable doing at Buffalo?
It's relationships. I mean, that's the thing that's the thing that I feel most comfortable with is going out and building those relationships, whether it is, as we talked about before, internally within your staff or on campus, or more importantly, out in the community. Because again, obviously from a philanthropic standpoint, we need the all the help that we can get. So I'm very comfortable when it comes to going out and being able to share the vision that we have here at University at Buffalo in terms of what our needs are, or even if it's not from a donor standpoint, going out to various community leaders and folks that are out there in our area, and be able to share with them what athletics brings, not just to university but to this community. And I'm always the one too, Ty, that when it comes to basketball games and football games, I want to visit with everybody, not just hang out in the premium seating area or stay in my suite or whatever the case might be. But I mean, you'll see me at a football game and a basketball game, going up and down the aisle, so to speak, and first and foremost just thanking people, because I want to be accessible. And at times, in our role, when you're accessible and depending on what's happening in the season, you're going to get an earful. But to be honest with you, I appreciate folks that have passion rather than apathy. And also I feel that when you're more visible to the folks that support you, again, it's like, as I mentioned very early on in this interview, you build that trust, and people see the action that you're sincere in what you're doing, and you build the trust with all your constituency groups, from your student athletes, your staff and coaches, the folks on campus, and then obviously folks out in the community and your alums.
I'll ask this last question and then we'll wrap. The good leader looks for problems to solve and sometimes sees those as challenges that they look forward to. Are there any upcoming leadership challenges that you look forward to in the short term and the long term, I guess, there at Buffalo?
Well, I think it's the answer to this question might be in unison with any AD that you ask. Obviously with the name, image, and likeness, and being able to figure out how we're going to be able to handle that moving forward, and how we're going to be able to handle it in a way that's consistent and equitable and fair. At the same time, fighting the public opinion, that's out there, which, obviously the name, image, likeness issues that we're going to be addressing is different from, pay for play, which every day it seems to be from a public sentiment standpoint, seems to be growing, based on, how we operate as, as a membership with, coaches buyouts and high profile student athletes that might be performing at such a high level, or maybe a high-profile student athlete that possibly suffers a career-ending injury. So, I've always had the firm belief that, I definitely want to maximize what we can do for our student athletes, but do it in a way that makes sense, and we'll be engaged with plenty of conversations here in the future with, obviously, my peers, folks in the conference offices, and coaches and student athletes to try to figure this out, because the worst thing that we can do is have 50 different states having 50 different laws in terms of how to address this. So that's the focus right now that we're all thinking about, and we're all scribbling down notes and
Yeah.
and trying to see what makes sense. That's the thing about this profession is the fact that people just see you on Saturdays, or see you on the Friday night basketball games, or what have you. But you know what, you also have to be very proactive in your thinking, and in terms of having the ability to forecast what this is going to look like in 3, 4, 5 years down the road, which I wish I had the answer what it's going to look like. But you know what, it's better now to be planning and thinking about obviously an opportunity like this that lays out in front of us, rather than being reactive.
Right. It's a big bullet point in a long list of bullet points that you have to face.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Well, Mark, this has been an excellent conversation. I really appreciate you joining us here on One Question.
Hey, Ty, I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
That was Mark Alnutt. He's the Director of Athletics at University at Buffalo. And of course, this is Ty Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.